Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. Last week, we talked about the diplomatic disputes between Tokyo and Beijing, and there are some new developments this week, so we have to do a follow-up. Before we do that, let me give a brief recap of what happened last time. It all began on November the 7th, when the new Japanese Prime Minister, Madame Sanae Takaichi, appeared before the Budget Committee of the House of the Representatives. She was confronted by a very sharp question. Let me read the question again. Does a contingency in Taiwan constitute a survival-threatening situation which allows for Japan to exercise the right of collective self-defense? And Takaichi said, it has been Japan's consistent position to seek a peaceful resolution to the matter. Then she went on to explain in details. And she said, if Communist China or if China launches a naval blockade, she didn't say against whom. Of course, people would assume it would be against Taiwan. But anyway, she didn't say it. If Communist China launches a naval blockade with warships, and the American Navy come to break the blockade, and the Chinese military resort to some sort of military forces to prevent the United States from intervening, then we have to make some preparations in advance. If she stopped there, the things would be serious enough. But she went on to say, we must contemplate on all kinds of worst possible scenarios. If things like launching a naval blockade with warships, then no matter what, it constitutes a survival-threatening situation. So that's what she said. And as we mentioned, we can imagine that how Beijing will respond to this kind of remarks. First of all, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing issues very serious démarches and protests. And then the next day, on the 8th, the Consul General of Beijing to Osaka, Japan, made a remark on his X account. Let me read it again. If you dare to arbitrarily intervene, then we will simply and unhesitatingly chop off your filthy necks. Are you truly prepared for the consequences? Very threatening and very undiplomatic. And the next day, he backed down a little bit, but he said, remarks like a contingency in Taiwan is a contingency for Japan, some kind of path to death chosen by some foolish Japanese politicians. So again, you can imagine how Japanese public react to this kind of remarks. Is that this is a declaration of war, and chopping off our prime minister's head is a matter of national security and things like that. So anyway, the fire is building up between the two capitals, and that's what happened last time. But after that, we can see the responses from both sides are quite different. On the Japanese side, they seem to want to ease the tension because we see that the MOFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Tokyo, they came out and said Japan hasn't changed its policy toward China. And Takaichi herself promised that she'll be more careful about her wording, about her remarks, but she would not withdraw her previous remarks. But on the Chinese side, things are quite different. They seem to be getting tougher and tougher on the issue. Not only the Ministry of Foreign Affairs elevated its attacks against Takaichi, and there's more to come. Let me give a few examples. The China Central TV station, namely the China's national TV station, there was a special column under this TV station. They make some harsh remarks. Let me put it this way. I have to read it out to you because the language is quite strong. Okay, one goes like this. Takaichi is spewing filth without any sense of decency. Was her head kicked by a donkey? Remember, this is a remark issued by China's national TV station. And can you imagine that? Then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a travel advisory to Japanese citizens and warning them not to visit Japan in recent days. And then Beijing issued a warning saying that they're going to conduct a series of live fire exercises in the Yellow Sea area. And this is a very sensitive area because this is it's an overlapping area of both China and South Korea's EEZs. So it poses a threat. It constitutes a threat to not only to Japan, to South Korea, or also to the American military people stationed in both South Korea and Japan. So this is quite serious. Then I guess you may wonder why Beijing wants to escalate the matter. What are the motivations behind all that? First is in the eyes of Beijing, as we mentioned before, Takaichi is a prime minister, a Japanese prime minister with an anti-China stance, and that annoys Beijing. Anyway, that's the first thing. Secondly, in this past April, in April 2025, this past April, she visited Taiwan prior to her becoming the prime minister. She met with our president, Lai Ching-te, and met with the speaker of the Legislative Yuan, Han Kuo-yu, and also met with our prime minister. So in the eyes of Beijing, Takaichi is not only a prime minister with an anti-China stance, but also with a pro-Taiwan stance. That's totally unacceptable to Beijing, and that's the second thing. And thirdly, many of you may not have noticed that our vice president, Bi Kim-cheol, attended the annual meeting of IPAC, the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, at the European Parliament, and delivered a keynote speech, which annoyed Beijing very much. But there's more to it. 2 days later, our former president, Madame Tsai Ing-wen, delivered a keynote speech at the Freedom Conference in Berlin, Germany. So 2 consecutive visits to Europe, to European countries, which is generally considered a diplomatic breakthrough for Taiwan on its relations with Europe and with the European countries. And again, that's a big shock to Beijing, and they want to counterbalance the negative impact in their eyes, the negative impact in their diplomacy. And the next consideration, I suppose, has to do with Communist China's domestic situation. Xi Jinping is now facing deteriorating economy, and the unemployment is getting worse and worse, and the general dissatisfaction among the people is mounting, and not to mention the massive scale purchase of civilian leaders, provincial leaders and ministers and so on and so forth, and the top generals. So they want to, or at least Xi Jinping himself want to divert people's attention from all these seemingly negative developments. So in a way, turning people's attention away from domestic problems to external problems or external challenges would benefit Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping is actually a beneficiary of the so-called diplomatic disputes between Tokyo and between Beijing. So that's kind of strange, but that makes sense. And the last reason I suspect that Beijing wants to test Trump's determination. Didn't Trump and Takaichi reach a so-called strategic consensus when Trump visited Japan last week actually? Didn't Trump tell Takaichi, I'll give you whatever you want? It seems logical that Beijing wants to test how far Trump's commitment to Japan has gone, and what kind of promise he would keep, and how far their cooperation can go. And that's something that Beijing wants to know. And this is a good way to test not only the Japanese side, but also the American side. That is how strong Trump's determination is. And that's something Beijing wants to know. So in the end, you may wonder how far this matter will go and how bad will it become? Well, actually, it's hard to say, because as we mentioned before, if our analyses are correct, then that means that on the Tokyo side, they want to calm things down. They don't want to escalate the whole thing, and they want business back to usual as soon as possible. And for Beijing, it's much more complicated. As we mentioned, that they have so many different motivations behind all their moves. They may have low targets and they may have high targets, and they may want to play the thing, or they may want to manipulate the whole thing to a certain extent and see how far it can go. So it's hard for us to determine how far it can go. But anyway, we'll keep an eye on the whole matter, and we'll keep you informed. I think that's all I want to share with you today. I hope you liked today's program. And please share it with your friends, and please subscribe to it if you haven't done so. And do remember to click the icon bell so that you can get a simultaneous notification when we have a new program on. And that's all for today. I'll see you next time.